Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Leadership in Construction podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today we're joined by Rob Garvey, who is a lecturer at the University of East London. And today we're going to talk about the education side of leadership and also the digitalisation of the construction industry. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Michael. And, I really do appreciate the opportunity to have this chat. Looking forward to it.
Thank you ever so much. I mean, we had a really great conversation initially about the podcast and what we're going to talk about today. So equally, I'm very excited to talk about this. So can we start off then, really sort of just getting a bit background behind yourself? How did you get into the construction industry? What is it that you do at University of East London? And how is it that you got to where you are today?
Okay, so I didn't start off and I had no real intention of being an academic. So I've ended up here. But actually, if we sort of rewind, like many people in the industry, I got into it via connections with my dad. My dad worked for 40 years for the same construction company, got a nice gold clock and all those sort of things. But really got engaged with it because he took me onto sites, took me onto various things, also gave me the opportunity of getting a bit of work experience. And that set me up for sort of saying, yeah, this could be good. So he worked for a contractor. I'm not sure if I should say this, but he advised me not to work for a contractor to begin with, and got me involved. And I took up a role with a quantity surveying practice. Through that, spent a couple of years doing the RICS qualifications, then went into academia full time. Came out in the depth of a recession, managed to get myself a job working with Thames Water. So quite different from where I was, but actually really good because I got involved in the management training scheme there. And that set me on a role to, again, probably what we're going to talk about now, get a much more grounded approach to what it means to manage things, lead things and the like. I then worked for a number of years with a company called Mace, a fledgling company at that particular time. Again, fantastic experience to get involved in really dynamic projects and a challenging time for the industry, but also for them as an organization as well. So that was good. And I suppose sort of just rolling forward, I got involved in projects like Terminal 5, and no doubt Terminal 5 has been instrumental in my career. I did actually work on with Thames Water, the land that Terminal 5 is on was Thames Water land, and I was involved on the project for actually getting ready for Terminal 5. So I've been involved in Terminal 5 plenty of times in my life. But anyway, and as a consultant working there with Mervyn Richards and the like, so Mervyn Richards heavily involved in a lot of the standards documentation around what we perceive as information management or understand as information management, leading into the digitization. That really gave me an understanding. They didn't call it BIM, they called it single model environment. But that concept that you've got an overlay of different projects, how do you actually integrate and understand how they all come together? Recession of 2008 came along. I managed to stick around for a few years in an organization, but it was a challenging time. Opportunity came along to work at the University of Westminster, where somebody gave me the opportunity to get involved in academia, and I genuinely enjoyed the teaching side of things, the students, inspiring the youngsters without a doubt is huge.
Yeah.
And at that particular time, nobody was really aware of BIM, so I was very much influential in introducing the concepts of BIM into academia. Got involved in the BIM Academic Forum, ended up being chair of the London BIM region. So all those sort of things have been quite instrumental in me developing my understanding around what we understand by digitization, and also what it means for academic institutions as well as organizations going forward. And in the past year or so, I've moved and I'm now part-time lecturing at the University of East London and doing a bit of consultancy work, helping organizations look at what they do around digitization and how they can embrace a digital future, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing career, and particularly around the introduction of BIM. So just very quickly, because there may be people listening and watching that aren't quite sure what BIM stands for, what BIM is, in a really short nutshell, because it's a huge topic. What does BIM stand for, and what is BIM?
It commonly stands for building information modeling, and I think that would be the term that most people would do it. When I teach it with my students, it's the first thing I ask, and we uncover that. For me, I think that it's an acronym that has its own meaning, and people interpret as they want to. I think there's a fundamental issue around information management. So building information management, if you like, but better information management. All these different types of acronym might be an appropriate way of dealing with it, but it is the concept of looking at how we manage information in a digital environment, in my way, and set that up that projects can use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, certainly, so my introduction to BIM was probably like, I'm trying to work out, I've been in construction now 14 years, I think 15 years nearly, so probably about 5 years ago, which is quite like late into the process of what BIM is. It's been around a lot longer, and a lot longer than people realize. But I think what mistakenly a lot of people, including myself at the start, just thought it was a Revit model, or 3D model. I don't want to, be biased towards Autodesk, but everyone thought everything in Revit, that's BIM. And I'm like you, I think it's BIM is information management. Fundamentally, that's what it is. And whether we knew it or not, we've been managing information for decades, but perhaps not in a coherent way. That's cross-sector or cross businesses that we can all understand. And really, I can't remember what I'm going to get shot for this, but I can't remember what the British standard is or what the international standards are. But there is an international standard for information management.
Yeah, no. So we obviously started off with BS 1192, which was information management, if you like, in an analog way. As a consequence of that, we developed some PAS standards. So that's PAS 1192, and they've now evolved into ISO 19650. So yeah, there are standards there. And I think, Michael, just picking up on what you say, ultimately what we do in construction, as in a lot of industries, is we manage information. Ultimately, that's what things happen. In the design phase, we're taking information, we're understanding what clients want, trying to interpret that in a particular way that we come up with a solution, however that manifests itself, and then we progressively develop that solution. And in doing so, we need progressively more information. And I think that all projects have been like that all the time and will always be like that. And I think that if you just sort of rewind a little bit and actually, why do projects fail? Well, the root cause of why most projects fail will probably involve poor information management at some point. However, that again sort of correlates to poor decision making. Ultimately, decision making is all about having good information at the right time to enable people to make the best decision based on the information they've got at that particular time. So why wouldn't we want to actually understand how to manage information better? And I think there's there's an element of blinkers are on, that people think that they have got the best information, and what they can't see is that they don't have the best information. They don't actually see that there is better information out there, or that they need better information, or that actually poor information is leading to things going wrong.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, we think we're better at it than we actually are. You know, you might be puzzled as to why we talk so much about information management. Surely it's easy, but when anybody that's ever worked on a project in the construction industry, the information of management is a challenge, is a real leadership challenge, on a project-to-project basis, and even on an organizational level as well. We go through having many conversations about how best to manage our information, and more what I'm seeing is clients want a specific way in which to manage the information that they'll adopt as an asset. So from a designer's perspective, we have a standard which we'll follow as an organization, but it usually is then tailored to actually what the client wants. So an airport standards between different airports will be slightly different as it will be to someone designing a warehouse or something like that. But it's specific to them, so we have to adapt. But the good thing about that is these standards that we talked about is there is a commonality between them all. So it's not complete start again and don't understand what even just down to the naming convention on documents. It's fairly common, fairly repetitive throughout. So everybody sort of understands where they are.
Yeah. And maybe that sort of gets to the heart of why people don't think information management, it's not sexy. There's an element of geekiness to it, and to a certain extent that sort of undermines the importance of it if it potentially.
And it's up there for me with health and safety.
Well, actually, you to manage health and safety, you need good information as well. So
exactly.
The two go hand in hand. I think that part of the aspects we've got to move forward and develop is to actually make it easier for everybody to understand what it means, and to be a lot more seamless. And I think by that I mean the way that we use our computers now, and I can be on my my Surface 1 minute, on my phone the next, or on on a PC, but the information just is there. Whereas not too long ago, we all had dial-up modems, and it was like it used to take time for the information to sync. So that's one aspect of managing information, the infrastructure that you need in place. But I think that 2 points that I would really make out of this. Okay, one is, as you say, file names and all this. How much time do we waste just looking for basic information? Where is that information? You've got it somewhere. So that's one thing. The other side of it is that what do we do to make sure that we've got the right information? What are the processes we've got in place to go through and ensure that we're bringing the right people together at the right time, that enable a drawing to be pulled together, that we are satisfied that all those involved are going to verify, validate that information to say, yeah, that's correct. And I think there will be plenty of lessons to learn out of project failure, and it goes without saying that obviously Grenfell is a significant one, but I don't know. I've started to look at it, and I'm just conscious that there would have been people in that value engineering meeting, and they made decisions, but what happened after that all of a sudden something happened that the situation enabled people to put cladding on the outside of the building that then precipitated the disaster that did. And nobody in that room, I cannot believe anybody in that room thought, hang on, what we're doing here is going to end up in the disaster that was created. And I think that there are probably many people in construction that think, oh, we had a lucky escape, that could have happened on our project. So the industry as a whole has to look at itself and the way that it manages things and manages information so that we make the right decisions and understand how we pull that together. And I'm really conscious of talking about Grenfell. The last thing I want to do is be flippant about it, or we have to learn those lessons.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a big, you talk about it being a geeky subject, but yeah, I mean, if you speak to the people I work with, if they start getting me talking about BIM or health and safety, I really go off on one, because I think I completely agree with you. I don't think you can understate how important, and the thing that's striking is there's an element of reluctancy and an element of naivety around the take up of information management. I worked with an engineer who sort of in 40s into his 50s, and he'd been in the construction industry, his whole working career. And when he started to learn about BIM, said, "So this is the same thing we've been doing for decades, just in a more digital way." And essentially, that is what it is. But I don't think you can understate the importance around that the management of sort of information, and totally get what you're saying around Grenfell, but we do have to learn those lessons, and it's not just a technical aspect either. It's how we communicate. One of the things that I say to teams that I work in is the more information we have, the better informed we are, the better decisions we make. And in terms of Grenfell, that was the at the cost of lives. And in most construction industry projects, it comes down to budget and program, which compared to lives is completely minute in reality.
Sure. So, I think building on that, Michael, this concept of, or part of what I was talking about there, is you make your decisions based on the information you have, and obviously if you're designing, you need to design it standards, making sure you've got that information before you, and the process that we need to instill in our way of working that makes sure that we're pulling that right information together at the right time. Mm-hmm. I think the other side of this is then what information can we get and what can we use to understand how our assets, how our buildings better perform, that then inform the decision making earlier on. And I think that again there's a gap there. The feedback loop isn't necessarily there that sort of says these are the buildings that we've built in the past, this is how they're performing now. Mm-hmm. We've got good information on that, whatever they are. Actually we need to be addressing some of those sort of things. So there is a inherent failing, I think, in the way that the process works overall, that great, we do great, and I think we've got to be careful. We do some great projects, and there are plenty of good projects that go on, but similarly, even on those, how do we make sure that we learn from how they're performing and effectively feed that back into the start of the project?
Well, that's it. That's the other thing I was going to say as well, is it's a whole life cycle of the asset, from concept to detail design to construction to the use. And as you say, then asset owners are going to build something similar, can find out what weren't the best bits and then improve those. But even just in the management of those assets when they're in use, having some of the knowledge about suppliers and particular details and things like that, tremendous amount of information to help the use and the maintenance of these assets into the future and learn from it. But is there a difference between quantity of information and quality information? Because there are time and time again, I see a huge amount of information thrown at people in construction industry, but only 50% may be relevant to what they're doing. How do we move away from just mass information dump to targeted information that's relevant?
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really important point. And again, it's how we set up understanding what information do we need, what information is expected. my experience of a few years ago now, but it's still the same. You receive your tender documentation and you receive too much information, and you've actually what's really important for you on that particular tender is a shed load of information that you've got to wade through. And maybe even in this digital age, i.e. using PCs, it's easy to dump far too much information into some of those documents.
Is it laziness?
I'm not going to comment on that, in that sort of sense, but maybe there is an element of a psychological blanket that we've given them all the information that we think we need, and actually there is a bit of due diligence to be done beforehand. What is it we really need to be giving to organizations? So is it laziness? It's to a certain extent, what you're ultimately wanting to do, if in that tender situation, is make sure that you've got the supplier to understand what the risks are involved, what they've got to do, and how they can give you the best, whatever you're asking for. But hopefully it's not priced, but it's a solution that is going to fit in to enable you as a contractor or a project manager or whatever to come up with the overall outcome at the end of the day. So we can look at absolutely the documents that we provide and actually sort of say, well, what is expected? How do we actually minimize that? What is the important information, and not necessarily repeat a load of stuff that isn't required.
Absolutely. And within all that information that you get, it might be something hidden that's critical to safety or critical to the services you're going to supply. And usually what happens is designers and clients sit on projects for about a year or two, and then they give a contractor about 4 weeks or months to price, and it's too much information for a contract to go through in such a short space of time and see absolutely everything. And I would wager that the information that is provided at tenders, whether it's to a contractor or to a designer, probably hasn't been gone through all of it by one person at one stage.
Projects are complex, aren't they? And one of the things that I'm really quite conscious of, and what I quite like to get my students to thinking about, is what is it we've got to do to set projects up for success. And the scenario you've just given is probably quite typical, but similarly, it's not conducive to setting a project up for success. You're all of a sudden you're behind the curveball straight away as the contractor, because you haven't got the right comprehension of what is actually needed, or the project's not even being given the opportunity to get the right people in the room at the right time to think about, right, what is the best way of doing this. And I'm again recalling times in my past where the project manager or the construction manager that's going to be running the project turns up for the interview just before the interview, and it's like, right, what's this about? And it's like, oh, come on, but that's what happens. And are they even going to be the project manager that's actually then going to be involved in the project? So none of that to me actually is conducive to setting the project up for success. And I think that if you look at success, when we talk about success in any of its sphere, a lot of it will come down to how you plan it, how you set it up, what you've got to do. And without doubt, we know how to do that. How often we execute it in the right way, we don't. Are you aware of the Get It Right initiative?
Yeah. I've recently come across that in the last, say, couple of years.
Okay, so, and what's interesting around that is Tom Barton, who's no longer with us, but who set that up. One of the things that he got was that the projects that worked best for him when he was at work was the ones that got delayed by 6 months or 3 months or whatever. And all of a sudden, they had that little bit more time to set the project up for success, and they were more successful. And it was like, so that was actually part of his thinking in the Get It Right initiative, that, right, okay, why do we have to sort of just give people not enough time to set projects up? And I think you can then think about that from a main contractor perspective, of the way that the main contractor works. I'm fairly confident that a lot more trade contractors, subcontractors do get properly inducted, but are they still the right people that are going to be the people that get inducted? Are they the people that are going to then be involved in the project throughout the duration of the project and whatever? So it follows through there. So yeah, and I think that's an important part of leadership. Coming back to
Absolutely.
leadership, when you're thinking about that, how do you actually set the team up so that they all have a common understanding of what the project's all about and enable them to work together in a collaborative way? And I absolutely understand the fact that the industry needs to be contractual. You need contractual arrangements and those sort of things, but that doesn't mean that you have to just work on contractual boundaries. You've got to work in a way that enables people to cooperate and enables them to come together in a way that actually works for everybody on the project.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant, and we're sort of moving off a bit now, IT and digitalization and things like that, and really getting into the nitty gritty. That this is all a similar topic, but it's the same story, isn't it? About around leadership and in the construction industry, because we talk about contracts and things like that. And I'm a big fan of contracts because I've done the training in that field. But a contract is a way to just administer how you pay people and how you measure contracts, how you measure changes. It's not how you lead people.
Absolutely.
So you have to be able to.
I like to call it the rules of the game. These are the sort of rules of the games in some aspects of that, but that doesn't mean, as you say, it's not about the leadership aspects.
No, absolutely. There's a contractual way in which to deal with items, which should be between one company and the next, but the actual people sat in a room need to be able to work together. But even before people start, in most instances that I've seen, there's this element of distrust, and they don't trust one another. And I think that's a historic thing from the 70s and the 80s, where everything was just price it low and then beat everyone up for a slice of the cake at the end, and suppliers probably get hit worst at that end at the lower end, and it's just argued between usually client and contractor. So around leadership and information management, how would you say we can set projects up to be successful, leading through information management? Have you got any bits that you can provide on that?
Well, I think we're sort of touching on some of them as we go.
Yes.
Without doubt, and I'm going to sort of reference ISO 19650. ISO 19650 is a project process to a certain extent. The stages that you would recognize from 0 to 8 on the RIBA planner work and the like are in a way replicated in ISO 19650, and it is in part actually understanding what it is to understand what is the information, how do you set your project process up, how do you make sure that you, whatever we call them, gateways, decision points, etc., how do you get to those decision points and make sure that you've got the best criteria to assess the information that's come in that enable you to say, yeah, great, let's move on to the next one. We're ready, we've got it. Or actually, no, we haven't. We need to go back. And picking up on the whole concept of life cycle, making sure that isn't just about, it's about satisfying client requirements, understanding and making sure we've understood those client requirements. So if you've understood that and you've developed that and you've got a good solution, and that's obviously moving forward. In terms of using the information management, having those robust processes, so the ISO 19650, the concept of a common data environment is not a technology solution. It is a process to go through, understanding that. And obviously the technology suppliers have adopted that process because it works for them, but that you go through your work in progress, that you share it and you publish it, and you've got appropriate sign off at the right times. So absolutely, there is a lot in that standard that could be picked up and used. So potentially following that, I think the other key thing around all of this is, and the there is a sense to me that people think that you can get good like this. Okay. And yet we do BIM. Well, actually, do you?
Yeah.
And how good are you at it? And I would sort of suggest that we need to be a little bit more pragmatic, and leadership needs to come into this to realize that actually we've got to develop our capabilities and competencies around how we get better at doing these sort of things. And particularly if you're working on a project then with new people, new organizations to you, how do you make sure that they're brought up to speed? So one of the key stages within the ISO 19650 process is all around mobilization. So it's bringing people onto the project and making sure that they do the understanding of the project, but they also understand how the systems work. And it's the individuals understand how the systems work and the processes work and the like. So there's a good aspect of that. So setting up the project so that you know, like anything, you know, you're not just going to pick a tool up and be good at it. You've got to practice it and you've got to use it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an element of a misunderstanding that people can just go onto a project and instantly be good at it. No, you've got to develop that understanding and skill. And I would hope it's a little bit more than wing it, but you know, I would. So let's say this, it was the London Marathon yesterday, wasn't it? So you know, there's plenty of people that were running the marathon probably for the first time, but they didn't start off by running a marathon tomorrow. They started off by running, you know, a mile. You know, and all of a sudden they build up. Now that doesn't mean that they're running every mile faster on they built up their level of stamina and all those sort of things, all the contributing factors that mean that they can finish it. Now, obviously, they're not all going to finish it in the fastest time of just over 2 hours and whatever, but, you know, they're going to finish it at a speed that was capable to them. And I think sometimes we've got to be a little bit more cognizant in the industry about, right, who is capable of doing what and at what speed, and how do we make sure that, not necessarily making them do it faster, making them sure that they do it more accurately, more correctly, and bringing that back to an element around quality.
I think that's brilliant what you're saying. I've never really thought about it in that way, in that using that analogy of the marathon is really good, because if as a client, you know, you have, these are the standards, this is how we manage information, and you're bringing on a designer or contractor to follow that, their uptake on it and their speed at which using that isn't going to be as fast as the client, because they've only been introduced to it for the first time. And you're right, the pace of a project or a pace of management of information is going to go as quick as the slowest person, or the first person, the last person to have taken the uptake. So there's an element of understanding of that, and of, you know, allowing that time to build up the stamina and build up the understanding so that they can sort of move as one. But yeah, then if you start to throw in, like we all do, ridiculous deadlines and caps on budget and all that sort of stuff, then, you know, all of a sudden you're focused on trying to just make a profit, and the information management bit goes out the window, and that's perhaps one of the more important parts of any project.
Yeah, and I think that you're picking up on, you're describing certain aspects that will really come down to a big difference to me between, you know, command and control, you know, ways of doing things, and actually ones that potentially would be described as more collaborative, or in my view, a little bit more systems thinking approach, where it's not about output and budgets and those sort of things, not decrying those, but it is very much more about trying to understand what is it you're trying to do, you know, what's the purpose of it, who's capable of doing what, and then underlying that, you know, where's the variation in that performance, and how do you make sure that you minimize that variation in performance, and that involves a different way of thinking, and I think sometimes we are sort of focused on that command and control top-down approach rather than one a leadership style, which I think you've been alluded to in the past, which is much more, well, actually, I'm not the one who knows everything. I've got to bring the right people in at the right time that are going to help develop the project and the right outcome.
That's fantastic. And, that's everything that the leadership in construction is about. It's about, change our way of thinking, change the conversation. So, that everything you just described there is absolutely brilliant. So, unfortunately, the podcast is limited timescales, but we could talk about BIM and leadership about this sort of topic for hours and hours and hours. One thing I do want to talk to you about, just before we come towards a close, is about education around leadership. Okay. So obviously you're in university and you're a lecturer. Yep. What do you see in terms of the education of leadership or students' expectations going into the construction business as an employer or employee?
I mean, obviously, one of the reasons you set this podcast up was because you didn't feel that in your education you got enough or a good appreciation of what leadership was. So I think that we're entering a really interesting phase within higher education. And I think there's two aspects to that I'll draw attention to. But specifically, potentially there hasn't been enough focus on what you might deem the softer skills. So that aspect, the too much education has been around the technical skills. And I think that sort of linking those two things, those technical skills can be picked up. And if you want to learn it now, just go on YouTube, more often than not. So there will be something there. Somebody's already done something and whatever. So what is it that you are going to get from your higher education experience? And I think, we need technical skills, don't get me wrong, but similarly, the core things that we've been talking about now, how you work together, how you engage, how you communicate effectively as a team, how you become a leader, and understanding how that works. I think that what I've seen in the last half dozen years or so is the emphasis being placed much on whether you call it graduate attributes. At University of East London, they call it mental wealth competencies.
Okay.
So, and if happily sort of provide the link to what they're talking about there, but the social and emotional intelligence that is required, the cultural, it really becoming quite important intelligences that are required that enable you to work empathetically with people around you, are things that are being integrated into the undergrad program as well as the postgrad program. So I think these are really significant changes. Obviously, from your perspective, they weren't there necessarily when you were studying, but it's being recognised that these are the important skills coming forward. And I 100% endorse that, because I think that the technical stuff you can pick up. If you're a civil engineer, you've got to understand concrete, and you've got to understand the fact that it goes from a slurry to this hard stuff, and it supports things. I could probably be a little bit more technical about that, but you have to understand some of those sort of things. But whether it's concrete in an office block or a railway tunnel or whatever, those technical aspects of absolutely, it comes together in that way. So I think that it's moving forward, and that's a good sign. Whether that's happening everywhere, I certainly see what University of East London is doing, and one of the things that attracted me to them was what they're doing around mental wealth competencies, is something that hopefully other courses see, hear, and pick up.
Fantastic. I mean, it is great to hear that things are progressing and moving forward in that element, because you're absolutely right. My introduction to leadership was by failure and not having things go right, and then not being equipped with the right tools in order to put things right. And now that I've done a lot of training myself, I've certainly managed to touch wood, turn some things around. So starting off on that foot, I think I did a podcast very recently I was interviewed on this occasion, and we were talking about the comparison between parenting and being a leader. And in the comparison, what I made was when you have children, I don't know whether you've got children, but I have 4.
I do, yeah. Yeah.
So I've got one at 5 and one at 7 weeks. And what I believe you can, the best gift you can give a child is around resilience and grit and growth mindset and things like that. But a lot of parents, and I've been victim to this as well, so I'm not going to start preaching, but we do focus occasionally on the reading, writing, spelling, things like that. And we do, my son wanted to do the ABC today. That's great, but it's nothing more than a gimmick. And to emphasize that point, I have dyslexia. I couldn't read, write until I was around about 10 years old. And okay. I would say that, throughout my career, I'm a fairly successful civil engineer. So I learned all those skills later on in life, but I had a lot of, as we call it, softer skills built up when I was younger. So I think you're absolutely right. At university level as well, you have to have an emphasis on technical stuff because it's essential to be able to build things. I got given that, but the in quotes softer side of things in terms of the leadership skills and the cultural skills and social skills are absolutely essential, I think, at the education level and coming into it. But the industry also needs to match that as well. I'm going to put it out there in that if I'm a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and I look at, we have attributes in which we need to meet to become professionally qualified, and we have attributes around social and leadership, but it's still not as hit hard as the sort of technical side of things. So we, as an industry as well, we can get better at looking at that side as well. So that's great. It's good to hear that we're moving forward. So, Rob, we're going to have to unfortunately bring this podcast to a close. But before I do, I want to thank you for your. I think we've had a great conversation. I've loved learning more about BIM and how we can lead the way in terms of the uptake of BIM or the uptake of just information management. And great to hear that we're making strides in education as well around leadership. So I just want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And I'm going to end the podcast with the question that I end every podcast with is, what do you think is the most important aspect to leadership?
Wow, that's a really good question. And I think understand yourself. If you understand yourself, then you can then understand how you empathize with others and actually take those forward. And from that, if you can afford me, I'd say there's 3 things around that. One is you can lead by example. On that basis, you can actually hopefully inspire others, because leadership is as much about getting followership. So if you're inspiring others, then they're going to follow you. And then do your best to create the right environment that enables everybody to be the best that they can be. And I think if you're a leader that can do those sort of 3 things, then actually all the other stuff around it will follow. So
that's absolutely brilliant, Rob. Thank you ever so much.
That's all right. Thank you very much.